Part 1 of the story was absolutely phenomenal. We got so much information about the world, the characters, Arsenos' origin, the political structure of Septimons, and more. But alongside all that info came a mountain of questions. The whole first part was packed with mystery. Now that part 2 has finally dropped and we've had some time to sit with it, let's talk about how the story continues and more importantly, how it chooses to answer those questions. If this is your first time watching, I highly recommend checking out the first video in this series. It should be linked at the top of the screen right now. In that one, I broke down every bit of the first part and shared my thoughts along the way. Some things were still unclear though, like I emphasized the conversation we had with Bulling and the ones we had with Augusta and and in this breakdown I'll explain everything I meant by that. Because in this second half, the way things unfold forces us to reconsider how those earlier interactions should have gone. So let's dive in and see how well part 2 holds up. If you enjoy this type of content, make sure to like the video and tell me what you think in the comments. Did this part answer what needed to be answered? Did it bring the story to a satisfying close, or did it leave us with more questions than answered? Put it all down in the comments, and of course subscribe and notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. So part 2 picks up exactly where part 1 left off. We just won the Great Aegon, and now we head over to meet Lupa. When we get there, we're also greeted by Arsenos, and Lupa starts telling us the same things we already heard about her. How she's the guardian deity of Septimons, how she lends support only to those who have proven themselves in battle, and all that stuff. And then when we touch Arsenos, something weird happens. The world around us distorts, clearly a sign that something is wrong. At that moment, Arsenos starts moving towards a place called the Veil of Glory. Now, I got to be honest here, as much as I love the idea of Arsenos in this story, I do wish the game had done a bit more with her. From the very beginning, she's been hyped as this powerful, revered protector, but in terms of actual involvement, she doesn't really do much beyond nudging the plot forward. Yes, the fight between her and Christophoro was cool and showed us that she is powerful. That scene was great. But still, for a character with so much weight and legend behind her, I was hoping for more, maybe deeper interactions or something that lets us actually feel her presence in the world. Not a major issue, but just a small nitpick. So as we start to make our way towards the Veil of Glory, things begin to feel off. Enemies start showing up in places they clearly went just moments ago. They're appearing out of nowhere, and not in the usual way. It immediately makes you think these things might not belong to our current realm. Maybe they're coming from somewhere else entirely. Maybe even the same realm where Christophoro is trapped in right now. And that starts to strengthen the whole theory about multiple realms. Now, after all that, there's a small but really impressive detail that I have to mention. The way Wuthering Waves transitions from cutscene to gameplay during this part is super smooth. As we're approaching the Veil of Glory, there's this gorgeous wide shot of the area. Something right out of a movie really, and then without any jarring cuts, it flows right back into gameplay, and I love that. It's clear that the devs are trying to refine the cinematic feel in this patch, and I think it is paying off. But then in that same cutscene, we see something strange. We see Lupa transform to Maia, and now Maia is walking towards the Veil of Glory, and that's when things really start clicking, or at least we think they do. See, as we approach the Veil ourselves, we begin to notice these strange fluctuations. There's an obvious disruption between our reality and something else, another realm, and this is also where we realize that the Threnodian has a role to play in all of this. Something we had only suspected before now becomes clear. And in the middle of it all was Lupa. Everything that happens seems to orbit around her. She's no longer just a part of the story, she's at the center of it. But here's what I really appreciate. When you go back and rewatch this scene with full context, you realize that while we're starting to piece things together, we're also getting things wrong. Like at that moment, the rover genuinely believes that the world we're currently in is the original world, but that's completely off. We're actually in our own alternate version, and I love that. The game doesn't let us be all-knowing. We're solving the mystery, yes, but we're also fumbling through it, getting clues, making theories, some right, some wrong. And that's what makes the storytelling feel so alive. So, the Veil of Glory itself is essentially where fallen Septimonian soldiers are buried. It's a graveyard for warriors who have died in battle. And when we enter, we see weapons stabbed into the ground, each one representing a fallen soldier. It's a powerful visual. Now, it's here that we are told the story of Hercules, and yes, this is clearly a reference to Hercules, but I assume Crow called him Hercules for copyright reasons. Anyway, we hear that Hercules is the son of the former Ephor, and he died fighting Tacit Discourse during the Dark Tide. That alone gives us some big lore, especially about how intense that period was. But the reason this location really matters is because it holds Septimon's Genesis Nexus. This is where the Threnodian has been harnessing power. It's pretty much the most important spot in all of Septimons. So we head into the chamber housing the Genesis Nexus, and right away we're attacked by Maia, or rather the Threnodian possessing Maia's body. Now this cutscene stood stood out to me for a couple of reasons. First, it really cements the connection between the Threnodian, Maia, and Lupa. Like, you can feel that bond between the three of them in this cutscene. But more importantly, this is the first time the rover directly interacts with any Threnodian, like ever, and I expected a lot more from that. See, we already know that Imperator, the Sentinel, recognizes the rover and even sees them as their arbiter. So I always figure that even if the Threnodians don't worship the rover or hold them in any high regard, at the very least they do know who the rover is. But what we got instead was underwhelming. The Threnodian barely acknowledges the rover. The only thing they really mention is that the rover shares a frequency with Cartathea. And honestly, I was extremely disappointed. I get that the game wants to focus on the story of Septimons right now, but let's not forget, whatever is going on with the rover, their past, and their true role in the world, that is probably the most important story in the whole of Wuthering Waves. So when this long-awaited face-to-face moment finally came, and the Threnodians seemed almost unaware of who the rover is, yeah, that was a letdown. Anyway, using the book we got from Frolova, we're able to send Lupa to another dimension, basically an alternate realm. And as we do that, we get this beautiful narration that reflects this story from different characters' perspectives. We hear about Lupa's journey, we get some insight into Cartathea, and even a bit on Frolova. It's scenes like this that really shows how Wuthering Waves storytelling shines. This isn't just plot progression, it's world building through emotion and reflection. It's one of those moments you really have to experience yourself to fully appreciate, and although it is too long to play the full clip, I will play a part of it now.
To lose our strength is the deepest fear of Septimontians. Pride hides the terror within. We fear no death, yet tremble before shame and failure. Did Domina Julia deceive me for this? I never got the chance to ask. The dark tide consumed all. Death took her, as it will take me.
This moment shows you the perspective of different characters. It showed you that even though you were using the rover, there were things going on around you, and it adds so much depth. It lets us step into the minds of other characters and understand how they see the world that they're stuck in, and I think it's a beautiful touch. Anyway, moving forward, the story kind of shifts gears. From this point to the end, we're no longer playing as the rover, we're now playing as Lupa, since she'd be sent into a completely different dimension. And with that change, the story pushes the entertainment aspect to the background and puts the spotlight on revelation. This part is all about giving us answers, and honestly, I have no problem with that. I actually think it's a great move. From the beginning, the story had been heavy on mystery and hype, so it only makes sense that now, with everything built up, we finally start to get some answers we've been waiting for. The first big reveal we get is all about the alternate dimensions. See, Lupa finally starts to remember everything, and here's the kicker. The entire story we've been playing through is just that, a story created by Christophoro. See, neither the rover nor Cartathea actually landed in the real Septimons. They each landed in a different iteration of Septimons. Different versions of the same place. Cartathea landed in one where the city was already swallowed by the dark tide, where everyone was gone. But Lupa had already been reliving version after version of Septimons, long before Cartathea even entered the picture. And with every new iteration, Lupa forgets everything she experienced in the last iteration. So to fix this, Cartathea came up with a plan. She left a piece of her frequency on Lupa's hand before sending her to the next iteration. That way, even if Lupa lost her memories, the frequency would remain, which is exactly why in the version where Lupa meets the rover could sense Cartathea's presence on her, even though those two had never actually met in that timeline. And honestly, this is such a satisfying reveal, especially because it ties so many earlier moments together. But this brings up one big question: the bullying and Augusta situation. Here's where things get interesting and a bit confusing. We're told that the rover didn't land in the real Septimons, but instead a story of Septimons. That much is pretty much confirmed, especially when you realize that we didn't have access to Abby. And by the end of the quest, we were told that what we experienced was a part of a constructed narrative. But in that story, we interacted with real characters, or so we thought. We spoke with Bullying, we won the Great Aegon, we met Augusta and Yuno. So now the big question is, did we actually connect with the real version of those characters? Now with Bullying, I can kind of understand. She gave us the copper mirror and she seems to be operating on a different level. Maybe she has the power to move across stories. Maybe she really was the actual Bullying. But what about Augusta and Yuno? Characters who seem completely grounded in the versions of Septimons we were in. Did we ever truly meet them? Will we have to reintroduce ourselves when we meet the real ones in the actual Septimons? Because honestly, it would feel strange if they just remembered hurt us, even though the game made it clear that everything we did happened inside a fictional version of the city. So in my mind, we didn't actually win the Great Aegon. That victory and everything associated with it only happened in the story. Or maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe there's something I missed. So if anyone out there has a different theory or caught something I didn't, I'd love to hear your take in the comments, because this part has been bugging me ever since the quest ended. Anyway, after that, Lupa heads to the aqueduct in Septimons. Now, ever since we arrived in the city, we noticed that certain areas were flooded. So now we get this really cool sequence where Lupa has to move these massive statues in order to drain the water. And I don't mean cutscene cool, I mean you actually see these statues moving in real time during gameplay. And that's just a really fun and visually impressive moment. Once the water is cleared and we get access to the aqueducts, that's when things really start to get revealed, like a lot. One of the first major things we see is about Julia, the head of the house that used to employ Lupa. You see, Julia had actually been conspiring with Christophoro. Turns out the Fractidus has been operating beneath Septimons, right in the aqueduct, for a while. And then we get this huge reveal about Maia. Originally, the story was that after winning the Great Aegon, she just vanished. But then, Julia says something that completely throws us off. She goes, "What does Christophoro want with a dead woman pulled from the sea?" That one line changes everything. It means Maia didn't just disappear, she fell into the sea and died. And Julia recovered the body and gave it to Christophoro. She's also been the one covering up all the activities the Fractidus has been doing under Septimons. Now, going back to the scene where Yuno banished Julia and the Great Aegon, if Yuno understood all of this, already knew about everything, I would say that scene made more sense and her reaction made a lot more sense. But I still wish that whole scene would have played out differently, because I still think it was too rushed. I think stretching it out a bit more would have made all the difference with that scene. Now back to the conversation between Julia and Christophoro. You see, I think that this entire scene is when we really start to understand how twisted Christophoro is. The way he talks about Maia, like her body is nothing more than a tool for experiments. It's chilling, it's unsettling, but even with all that, the part that really locks in who Christophoro is comes right after this. So the next conversation we get is between Christophoro and Frolova, and honestly, for every Fractidus apologist out there, every person who says, oh, they're not really the bad guy, they're just trying to save the world in their own way, this scene does not help your case, because this isn't just a scene that paints the Fractidus in a morally grey light. This straight up shows how twisted they are. First up, the way they talk about Maia is disturbing. Christophoro doesn't speak about her like she's a person. He talks about her like a prop, like she exists solely for entertainment, just something to play with. And Frolova doesn't even flinch. She doesn't object. She just goes along with all of it. But beyond just how messed up this part is, the real weight of this conversation comes from the information it reveals. This is where the game starts shedding light on a lot of things we've been kept in the dark about until now. You see, Maia is actually a creation of the Threnodian, just like Cartathea, and I did not see that coming at all. Just like Cartathea, Maia didn't want the Threnodian to succeed. She didn't want them to win. So after winning the Great Aegon, she took matters into her own hands. She stabbed herself straight through the heart and let herself fall into the sea. She sacrificed herself to stop the Threnodian, and that is noble, that is powerful. We also get confirmation on what the Fractidus are doing in Septimons. They're working to help the Threnodian restore its power. And again, to everyone out there trying to defend the Fractidus, this whole scene makes it really hard to see them as anything but the bad guys. The Threnodian literally wants to plunge the world into chaos with the dark tides. It wants to destroy everything, and the Fractidus are helping it do that. So yeah, this does not help your case. And what's maybe the most chilling part in all of this is the fact that Frolova is going to be a playable character. Like, yeah, I get it. Everyone wants to pile all the evil onto Christophoro, and for good reason. There is no nuance to him, he's just straight up evil. But Frolova is in on all of this too. She may come off as a tragic villain or an anti-hero, but she's still complicit. So I'm a little nervous. I'm curious to see how the game is going to make her work as a character. How they'll let her be playable while still being a part of something this dark. Anyway, after that conversation, we get this really intense scene. A conversation between Maia and the Threnodian. And really, this is just the Threnodian trying to break her, and honestly, it's working. You can see it slowly chipping away at her, and it just makes you think about everything Maia has been through. Everything she's had to endure as a gladiator, as a person, being used, betrayed, hurt, tossed aside, and now this on top of all of that. It genuinely makes you feel for her. You can't help but pity everything she's been through. But at the same time, it really highlights just how strong she is. Because instead of folding under all that pressure, under the pain, the loneliness, the manipulation, she chose to stand up and make the ultimate sacrifice. She gave herself up for something bigger than her, and that's powerful. After that scene, we as Lupa go into battle against the Threnodian, who at this point has become this grotesque fusion of Maia and the Threnodian Threnodian called the Lady of the Sea. It doesn't look pleasant at all, but we fight her, and in classic Crow fashion, that fight was epic. The music was epic, the cutscenes were epic, everything about that fight was epic, and it seems like this, again, that really makes you appreciate this game, because there is so much about this fight that just makes you want to stay here and continue fighting this character. After that, things kind of shift into a montage. Lupa defeats the Lady of the Sea, and the version of the Threnodian, the one that the Rover was fighting, gets taken down too. Then we suddenly see Christophoro and Scar together in this dramatic shot. And honestly, right now I am confused, because why are we not heading back to Huanglong? The last time we saw Scar, he was being imprisoned in Huanglong, so why is he out now? There's been no explanation, no scene with Jinshi, no dialogue from anyone from Huanglong to even acknowledge this. The game really needs to clear this up. Anyway, we see Christophoro trying to apprehend them, but of course they manage to escape. And now that the Threnodian has been defeated, or at least severely weakened, Christophoro, the Rover, and Lupa finally arrive in the real Septimons. But before the story fully wraps up, we hear something important from Christophoro. She tells us that the Imperator left something behind, something tied to our identity, but here's the catch. Whatever it is can only be found in the next area of Septimon, so it looks like we have to wait until version 2.5 to uncover all that. Then we get this really emotional moment. Lupa finally pays her respects to Maia. She finds Maia's sword and places it in the Veil of Glory, honoring her life and her sacrifice. It's a quiet but powerful gesture. And with all that said and done, the story finally comes to an end. So, what do I think of this part of the story? You see, there's something about the entire body of work, about the imperfection of Wuthering Waves 2.4, that somehow feels perfect. It's this mix of flaws and brilliance that leaves you feeling incredibly satisfied by the time the story ends. From the narrative to the music to the world building, everything comes together in such a seamless, emotional way. I mean, that detail with the music, using the same track to send us off as they did when we first entered the version 2.4. That's what I mean by full circle. It's poetic, it's thoughtful. It shows how much care was put in crafting this story. I cannot praise it enough. Sure, there were some inconsistencies. The whole Augusta situation still confuses me a bit, but honestly, telling a story with alternate dimensions, timelines, and layers of reality, and still having it feel this cohesive, that is insanely hard to pull off, but Crow Games did it. Characters like Buling, who barely had any screen time, left a strong impression. Maia, an NPC, felt like someone we truly knew and lost. And Lupa, who was introduced just in this version, already feels iconic. The emotional investment this game was able to build in such a short time is very impressive. So yeah, hats off to Wuthering Waves and Crow Games. You have outdone yourselves once again. My only concern now is, how do you top this? I mean, it was a 9 for me before, but now it is solid 9.5. And the only reason I'm not giving it a perfect 10 is because I don't believe in perfection. There's always room to grow. But make no mistake, this story left me beyond satisfied. But honestly, what do you all think? Am I overhyping the story, or do you feel like it deserves every bit of praise I'm giving it? And seriously, I want to hear your thoughts about the whole Augusta situation and the Great Aegon. Like, did we actually accomplish anything in Septimons? When we spoke to Augusta, when we won the Great Aegon, did any of that really happen in the real world? Or was it all just events within a fabricated story? I'm genuinely confused on that front, so please drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's figure it out together. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.